Her husband and mother-in-law beat her, but they didn't expect this to happen. Valeria nervously adjusted her wedding dress in front of the mirror. Her hands were shaking, but her smile reflected the hope of someone who believed she was beginning the happiest chapter of her life. The vows exchanged a few hours earlier still echoed in her mind. "I promise to love and respect you in sickness and in health." Javier, with his confident demeanor and firm voice, had assured her that he would always be by her side. But that promise, which still made her sigh, was about to be brutally broken when they arrived at the house they would now share. A spacious but gloomy home belonging to Margaret, Javier's mother. The atmosphere already felt heavy. Margaret greeted them with a cold hug and a calculating look directed at Valeria, which did not go unnoticed. "I hope you understand, Valeria, that in this house, things are done my way," said Margaret, breaking the brief silence. Javier said nothing. On the contrary, he nodded with an almost imperceptible grimace, as if that statement were something natural. Valeria laughed nervously, trying to soften the moment. "Of course, Margaret. I'm happy to be here and learn how things are done." But before she could finish, Margaret interrupted her with a gesture of disdain. "I don't want you to say it. I want you to prove it." The coldness in her tone made it clear that this house would not be a welcoming home that night. Valeria tried to talk to Javier about how uncomfortable she felt, but he reacted in an unexpected way. "Why do you have to be so sensitive? Why do you have to complicate things?" he growled as he dropped his jacket on the sofa. "My mother is being kind by letting us live here. You could show some gratitude." "Javier, I just felt she was a little harsh with me. I just wanted to tell you that," Valeria replied, trying to remain calm. Javier let out a dry laugh. "Always making a drama out of everything." That simple phrase hit her like a blow to the chest. That night, Valeria went to sleep with the feeling that something in Javier had changed, as if the man she had married had disappeared. The days that followed confirmed her fears. Margaret imposed her will on everything, from what Valeria should cook to the clothes she could wear. Every suggestion was accompanied by scathing criticism. "That blouse is too tight. I don't want the neighbors to think we have a—" Margaret paused, letting the silence imply the worst. "What?" asked Valeria with a lump in her throat. "You know what I mean. Don't make me say it out loud." Every word was like a dagger, and Javier never intervened. On the contrary, he seemed to support his mother, increasing the demands on Valeria. One afternoon, while Valeria was washing the dishes, she heard Javier and Margaret talking in the living room. "She has to learn her place," said Margaret. "She will. She just needs time," replied Javier. Although there was a hint of impatience in his tone, Valeria felt the heat rise to her cheeks. Her place. What did that mean? In the months that followed, she understood with painful clarity. Javier began to demand that she quit her job as a secretary, saying that it was not appropriate for his wife to work while he dealt with household responsibilities. The day she handed in her resignation was one of the most humiliating of her life. Her boss, a kind man who had trusted in her professionalism, tried to convince her to stay. "Valeria, you're one of the best secretaries we've ever had. Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked with concern. "It's best for my marriage," she replied in a thin voice, even though tears threatened to betray her. That night, Margaret celebrated her resignation with a venomous comment. "You finally understand how a real marriage works. Now you can call yourself a wife." When Valeria tried to defend herself, Javier exploded for the first time. "Shut up, Valeria. You always have to ruin everything with your complaints. My mother is right. You should learn to be more grateful." The words echoed in the room, leaving Valeria frozen in shock. But the hardest emotional blow came when Margaret added with a cynical smile, "A woman who doesn't know how to obey her husband doesn't deserve respect." That phrase was tattooed on her mind, repeating like a poisonous echo as she went up to the room she shared with Javier that night. While he slept peacefully beside her, Valeria cried silently. She had imagined a future of love and companionship, but now she was trapped in a nightmare. Days turned into weeks, and Javier and Margaret's control became suffocating. Valeria was reduced to a shadow of the woman she once was. When she tried to share her suffering with an old friend, the friend looked at her in disbelief. "Valeria, you have to get out of there. This isn't normal. But Javier had been clear. If Valeria talked to anyone about what was happening in the house, she would face consequences. One night, after a particularly violent argument, Javier left her crying on the kitchen floor, while Margaret watched from the doorway with a satisfied smile. Valeria clenched her teeth. She felt something inside her break, but she also felt a small spark begin to burn. She didn't know how, but she had to get out of that house before it destroyed her completely. The following days were a downward spiral of humiliation and abuse. Valeria always wore a forced smile and tried not to show any signs of weakness, but the atmosphere in the house became more hostile with each passing day. Margaret found new ways to belittle her, while Javier, increasingly distant, reinforced his control over her. One morning, Margaret summoned Valeria to the living room, while Javier watched from his usual spot on the sofa. Margaret's expression was stern, almost triumphant. "I want to talk to you about something very important," she said, pausing deliberately to increase the tension. Valeria nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "I can't continue to tolerate your lack of respect for this family. You don't know how to clean properly. You cook badly. And to top it all off, you don't know how to behave like a wife. I do my best." "Margaret, I always try." Valeria began to justify her efforts, but she was abruptly interrupted. "Trying is not enough," Margaret snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "If you can't meet the expectations of this house, perhaps we should reconsider your place here." Valeria looked to Javier for some words of support, but he said nothing. He just shrugged, as he took a sip of coffee. "Mom's right," he finally said. "You should try harder." Valeria felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Instead of protecting her, Javier had decided to side with his mother. Valeria felt rage begin to burn inside her, but she didn't have a chance to respond. Margaret was already getting up, turning her back on her in a gesture of complete disdain. That same afternoon, Javier organized a small gathering with some friends at the house. Valeria was not allowed to give her opinion about the event, nor was she informed in advance. The task of cooking and preparing everything fell exclusively on her, while Margaret supervised her every move with scathing comments. "Don't ruin it," said Margaret, as she watched Valeria mix the batter for a cake. "This is your chance to prove that you're worth something." When the guests arrived, Valeria did her best to be friendly and cordial, although she was overwhelmed by exhaustion and sadness. The evening took a humiliating turn when one of Javier's friends made an inappropriate comment about Valeria's dress, insinuating that it was too simple. "It seems they don't let you spend money on clothes," said the man with a mocking laugh, provoking laughter among those present. Valeria felt her face flush with embarrassment, but before she could respond, Javier added with a dry laugh, "It's not like she has much sense of style, right?" Laughter echoed through the room, and Valeria had to quickly excuse herself, claiming she needed to check something in the kitchen. She closed the door behind her, her hands trembling as she clung to the edge of the sink. Tears began to fall silently, but a noise behind her startled her. It was Margaret. "I hope you're not thinking of making a scene," she said with an ironic smile. "It would be so embarrassing for Javier." Valeria bit her lip to keep from responding. She was trapped in a web she didn't know how to escape. Every time she tried to get up, they pulled her down further. That night, when everyone had left and the house was quiet, Valeria confronted Javier. "Why did you let them humiliate me like that?" she asked, her voice breaking. Javier, who was already half asleep, looked at her with irritation. "Don't make a drama. It was just a joke. Stop being so sensitive. It wasn't a joke. You were cruel," Valeria replied, her voice rising a little higher than usual. Javier stood up suddenly, his eyes dark and cold, as she had never seen them before. "Lower your voice," he said in a threatening tone. "Don't make me lose my patience." The silence that followed was deafening. Valeria backed away, realizing that any resistance could lead to even worse consequences. That night, while he slept, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she had reached this point. The cycle of humiliation and abuse continued for weeks, until one day, while Valeria was cleaning the house, she found a letter that Margaret had left on the table. It was an invitation to a charity event that Javier and Margaret would be hosting. "You're not going, of course," said Margaret, noticing that Valeria was looking at the letter. "These kinds of events are not for someone like you." The humiliation was constant, but Valeria knew that something inside her was changing. Every hurtful word and every derogatory remark fueled a spark that was beginning to burn inside her. That night, as she looked out at the empty house from the balcony, Valeria vowed that she would find a way out. The spark that was beginning to burn inside Valeria grew rapidly, but every attempt to rebel against the oppression met with an implacable wall. Javier had become a man she barely recognized, and Margaret, with her controlling attitude, seemed determined to destroy any trace of the confidence Valeria had once had in herself. One night, while Valeria was preparing dinner, Javier arrived earlier than usual. His mood was gloomy, and the weight of daily tensions seemed to be on his shoulders. Margaret, as always, was sitting on the sofa, watching every move Valeria made. "Dinner is late," Javier said, dropping his briefcase on the floor with a thud. "I'm almost done. I just need a few more minutes," Valeria replied cautiously, but her seemingly calm tone did not appease Javier. He stood up abruptly and approached the stove, looking contemptuously at the stew boiling in the pot. "It's always the same with you. You can't even do something as simple as this correctly." Valeria felt her heart racing. "Javier, I'm doing the best I can," she said, but he didn't let her finish. In a fit of rage, he hit the pot, causing the stew to spill onto the floor. The sound of metal hitting the tiles echoed throughout the house. Valeria backed away, her hands trembling as she tried to hold back the tears. Margaret watched from the living room, her face inscrutable, as if it were all part of a show she had seen many times before. "Clean it up," she ordered, and Valeria fell to her knees on the floor and began to pick up the remains of the stew with a rag. Her hands were covered in hot food, and the physical pain only added to the emotional weight she carried as she cleaned. A tear fell to the floor, mixing with the mess around her. "Stop crying. You're acting like a child," Javier said before leaving the kitchen, leaving Valeria alone with her pain. Margaret, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. "If you don't learn how to handle a man, you'll end up alone and with nothing." That night, Valeria couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the marks on her hands from the hot stew. Margaret and Javier's words echoed in her mind, but something inside her was beginning to grow stronger. The next morning, Valeria decided she needed to talk to someone. She thought of Teresa, her mother, but Javier had forbidden her from having any contact with her family. "They're a bad influence," he had said more than once. However, this time she ignored his orders. When Javier left the house, Valeria locked herself in her room and dialed Teresa's number. "Valeria, what's wrong?" Teresa's voice sounded concerned on the other end of the line. "Mom?" Valeria said, but her voice broke and she couldn't continue. "What did they do to you?" Teresa asked urgently. The words began to pour out of Valeria like an unstoppable stream. She told her about the humiliations, the shouting, Margaret's contemptuous looks, and Javier's suffocating control. "You have to get out of there, daughter. You can't go on living like this," Teresa said firmly. "I can't, Mom. He would find me, and I don't want to put you in danger." "Valeria, listen to me carefully. No man has the right to treat you that way, no matter what you have to do. You have to find a way to escape." Fear was still strong than her determination, but that call planted a seed in Valeria's heart. That night, while Javier slept, she sat down at the computer and began searching for information about help centers for women in situations of violence. However, Javier soon realized that something was changing in Valeria. One night, when he returned later than usual, he found her looking through some documents on the table. "What are you doing?" he asked suspiciously. "Nothing. I'm just organizing some things," Valeria replied quickly, trying to hide the papers. Javier was not convinced. He grabbed the papers and began to look through them. They were brochures about legal and psychological support. His face twisted into a mixture of fury and mockery. "So now you're planning to leave me," he said, throwing the papers on the floor. "You think you can leave without consequences?" Valeria felt fear paralyzing her, but she managed to respond. "I just wanted to inform myself. It doesn't mean anything else." "You better," Javier snapped, "because if you try anything, I assure you that you will regret it." That threat was the last straw. That night, Valeria began to plan her escape. She packed some of her belongings in a small suitcase that she hid in the closet. She knew she couldn't wait long. A few days later, during a particularly violent argument, Javier pushed her against the wall. The impact left her stunned, but it also ignited a determination she had never felt before. That same night, she waited for everyone to go to sleep and took her suitcase and left the house with her heart racing. With the little money she had managed to hide, she took a taxi to Teresa's house. When she arrived, her mother welcomed her with open arms, but when she saw the marks on Valeria's face and arms, she couldn't hold back her tears. "This is over, daughter. I won't let you go back to that man," Teresa said firmly. For the first time in a long time, Valeria felt a glimmer of hope. But she knew that the battle was just beginning. Before continuing, we want to know more about you. Where are you watching from? Leave us a comment with the name of your city or country. We would love to know and get to know you. Where do these stories come from? Seeing Valeria's condition, Teresa wasted no time. She helped her wash her wounds and gave her clean clothes. Meanwhile, Valeria's thoughts were a whirlwind of fear, anger, and shame. She knew that Javier wouldn't take it lying down when he found out she was gone. "Mom, he's not going to let this go. He's going to come looking for me," Valeria said with a trembling voice, staring at the door as if Javier could walk in at any moment. Teresa, with a mixture of love and determination in her eyes, replied, "Let him try. You're not alone, sweetie. I won't let anyone hurt you again." That night, Teresa sat next to Valeria and listened to everything her daughter had endured. Every blow, every insult, every humiliation. Teresa's anger was palpable, but she didn't want to show it too much because she knew Valeria was on the verge of breaking down. "We'll do this together, Valeria. We're going to get help. We won't let them continue to destroy you." The next morning, Teresa accompanied Valeria to a hospital in the neighborhood. Valeria tried to cover the marks on her face with a handkerchief, but the attentive eyes of the nurses immediately saw what was happening. "Are you the patient?" asked one of the nurses, pointing to the marks. Valeria nodded slowly. "Please come with me." The doctor who treated her asked detailed questions, but Valeria could barely respond. When the doctor suggested filing a police report, Valeria hesitated. "I can't, doctor. If Javier finds out I went to the police..." "It's your right, Valeria, and it's also necessary to protect you," said Teresa, holding her daughter's hand. Finally, Valeria agreed. With the medical report in hand, Teresa took Valeria to an organization that helped women in situations of domestic violence. There, they met a lawyer named Manuel, who welcomed them with kindness and professionalism. "Valeria, you are not alone in this. There are laws that protect you, and my job is to make sure you get justice," said Manuel, taking notes as Valeria told her story. Manuel explained that they needed to gather solid evidence to file a formal complaint against Javier. "Do you have any messages, photos? Anything we can use?" Valeria thought about her phone, where she had saved some messages from Javier that showed his controlling and threatening side. She also remembered the times she had tried to take photos of the marks on her skin, but had deleted them for fear that Javier would cover them up. "I have some messages, but not many photos," Valeria said with a tone of guilt, as if she hadn't done enough to defend herself. "Don't worry," Manuel replied with a reassuring smile. "With the messages and your testimony, we can get started." Meanwhile, Teresa took charge and went to Margaret's house, while Valeria remained in the temporary shelter offered by the organization. When she arrived, she knocked loudly on the door, and Margaret greeted her with a look of contempt. "What are you doing here?" Margaret asked, crossing her arms. "I'm here to drop you off." "Of course Valeria is never coming back," Teresa said firmly, leaving no room for reply. Margaret let out a mocking laugh. "That's not for you to decide. Javier is her husband, and she belongs to him." Margaret's words made Teresa's blood boil. She took a step toward her and pointed an accusing finger at her. "Listen to me carefully, Margaret. My daughter doesn't belong to anyone, not you or that coward of a son of yours. And if you try to get close to her, you'll have to deal with me and the law." Margaret, surprised by Teresa's attitude, tried to maintain her composure. "Don't talk about the law. You don't know who you're messing with. I don't care who you are or what you think you can do." This time, Valeria is not alone. Teresa turned and left the house without waiting for a response. Back at the shelter, Valeria worked with Manuel to strengthen her case. Every text message, every witness willing to talk about what had happened in that house. It was a piece of the puzzle. They even managed to contact a neighbor who had heard constant screams and was willing to testify. However, the momentary calm was broken one night when Javier showed up at Teresa's house, pounding on the door furiously. "I know she's here, Teresa. Let me in," he shouted, as the door shook with each blow. Teresa approached the door, but did not open it. Instead, she spoke in a firm voice from the other side. "Go away, Javier. Valeria is no longer yours to control. You have no right to separate me from my wife," he shouted, becoming increasingly agitated. "You yourself destroyed that right. Now get out before I call the police." Javier cursed loudly and finally walked away, but not without leaving one last threat. This doesn't end here. Inside the house, Valeria listened to everything from a corner, tears running down her face. "What did I do to deserve this, Mom?" she asked between sobs. "It's not what you did, daughter. It's what they are. But this is going to end. I promise." Valeria knew that the road to freedom would be long, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that she wasn't facing everything alone. Margaret was sitting in the living room, her expression stiff as always, when Javier burst into the house enraged, slammed the door, and threw the keys on the sofa. "I had to go to Teresa's house like a damn criminal because Valeria ran away," he growled, his voice charged with anger. Margaret looked at him disapprovingly, although she kept her tone cold. "I told you she was weak. You didn't listen to me when I insisted she needed discipline." "Discipline," Javier laughed bitterly, resting his hands on his hips. "What she needed was someone to control her from the beginning." Margaret stood up calmly, smoothing the skirt of her dress. "And that's what we'll do now. If Valeria wants to fight, she'll have to understand who's in charge at that moment." Margaret picked up the phone and dialed a number. Valeria didn't know that from that moment on, Margaret and Javier were beginning to prepare a legal and emotional counterattack to regain control. Meanwhile, at the shelter where Valeria was under protection, Manuel, the lawyer, was reviewing the documents that Teresa had brought from Margaret's house. Among them was a copy of the marriage certificate and several bills in Javier's name that showed the level of financial control he had over Valeria. "This proves that he kept her completely financially dependent," said Manuel, pointing to the bills. "It's important to strengthen your case." Valeria nodded, but her face was full of doubt. "And if that's not enough, Javier is very powerful. And Margaret," she paused, her voice trembling as she remembered her mother-in-law's poisonous words. Manuel placed a hand on the table to get her attention. "Valeria, we're going to win this, but I need you to trust me and be strong. We can't let them intimidate you anymore." Teresa, for her part, couldn't stay calm. She decided to confront Margaret directly. Dressed with determination, she arrived at the house she hated so much, but this time with the support of knowing that Valeria was safe, even if only temporarily. Margaret opened the door with a cynical smile. "Oh, Teresa, you came to return my daughter-in-law." "No, Margaret, I came to leave. Of course, if you dare to approach Valeria again, you will face legal consequences." Margaret let out a sarcastic laugh. "What do you know about that? I have the medical report, Javier's messages, and witnesses willing to speak in court. So don't underestimate what I can do," Teresa replied firmly, her voice charged with a strength that Margaret did not expect. For the first time, Margaret seemed uncomfortable, but she quickly regained her composure. "You don't intimidate me, Teresa. This isn't your battle. It may not be my battle, but she's my daughter, and no one will hurt her while I'm alive." Before Margaret could respond, Teresa turned and left, leaving Margaret with a mixture of fury and concern. Valeria wasn't sure what to expect when her case went to court. The days that followed were a mixture of hope and fear. Manuel worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing Valeria's testimony for the day of the trial. Valeria was nervous, but Manuel's presence gave her the strength she needed to enter the courtroom. Javier and Margaret were already there, their faces tense as their lawyers spoke in low voices. When Valeria took the stand, Javier's eyes pierced her, but she decided not to be intimidated. With a trembling voice at first, she began to recount the months of abuse, control, and humiliation she had suffered. They took away my job, my independence, and my dignity. He made me feel worthless, said Valeria. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at the judge. But the most painful thing was that he never defended me from his mother's humiliations. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Javier tried to interrupt, but his lawyer stopped him. When Javier's lawyer took the floor, he tried to paint Valeria as a problematic and exaggerated woman. It's not true that on several occasions you complained about trivial things like the dinner menu, he asked, trying to trivialize her suffering. Valeria remained calm. Complaining about something trivial does not justify the beatings, the insults, and the constant control. Valeria's testimony was supported by the medical report and Javier's messages, which Manuel presented as irrefutable evidence. He also called the neighbor as a witness, who confirmed hearing screams and constant arguments in the house. When the judge adjourned the session, Valeria felt that she had finally done something for herself, but the outcome was still uncertain. The tension in the courtroom was palpable when the judge resumed the session. Valeria sat next to Manuel, who was looking over some documents with a serious but confident expression. Javier and Margaret seemed less confident than they had at the beginning of the trial. Their lawyers were whispering to each other, discussing possible strategies, but the evidence against them was beginning to pile up like an insurmountable wall. When the judge took the floor, he asked the lawyers on both sides to present their closing arguments. Psychological, physical, and emotional abuse is not a trivial matter, Your Honor. The messages, the medical report, and the testimonies demonstrate a pattern of control and violence that has deeply damaged my client, Manuel said, pointing to Valeria. What she needs is not only justice, but protection to ensure that she is never again subjected to this kind of suffering. Javier's lawyer, on the other hand, tried to minimize the facts, claiming that the accusations were exaggerated and that Valeria simply did not know how to adapt to the dynamics of a traditional family. My client is a hardworking man, Your Honor. All he did was try to maintain order in his home, something his wife misinterpreted as control. Javier nodded from his seat, but the judge did not stop convinced. His gaze remained fixed on the documents in front of him, and his eyes revealed a mixture of disbelief and disapproval of the defense's arguments. Finally, it was Valeria's turn to give her final statement. She stood up with trembling hands, but when she looked at Teresa, who smiled at her from the back of the room, she felt a surge of strength. I am not here to seek revenge or to hurt anyone. I am here because I need to get my life back. For months, I lived in fear, feeling that everything I did was wrong. They made me believe that I was worthless, but I am here today to prove that that is not true. Valeria took a deep breath and for the first time looked directly at Javier. You promised me love and protection, but what you gave me was pain, no more. The silence in the room was overwhelming. Margaret looked away, while Javier kept his expression hardened, although his eyes reflected something that could be regret or simple frustration at seeing that he was losing control. Hours later, Valeria and Teresa waited in a small cafe near the courthouse while the judge released Manuel. He arrived with an envelope in his hand and a look of relief on his face. We did it, Valeria. Manuel placed the envelope on the table. The judge has ruled in your favor. You have the divorce, protective measures, and financial compensation for the damages suffered. Valeria felt tears begin to fall down her face, but this time they were not tears of sadness. Teresa hugged her tightly as they both cried with relief. This is not only a legal victory, my daughter. It is a victory for you, for your freedom, Teresa said with a smile full of pride. However, Manuel warned them that they still had to be cautious. Javier may try to appeal or even look for ways to violate the measures, but you have my support, and whatever happens, we will be prepared. Back at their home, Margaret couldn't hide her anger. How could you let this happen? She yelled at Javier as he sat on the couch drinking in silence. I warned you that you couldn't trust that woman. Enough, Mom, Javier replied in a tired voice. I lost. Okay, don't remind me. Margaret, however, was not willing to accept defeat. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. I have to fix this. That woman can't get away unpunished. Meanwhile, Valeria and Teresa returned home. The peace they felt was something new for both of them, but they also knew that they still had a long way to go. That night, Valeria opened her computer and wrote a message that she never imagined she would share publicly. For months, I was trapped in a relationship that destroyed me, but today, I can say that I am free. My story does not end here. It is only the beginning of a life I never thought I could have. Valeria shared her post on social media without knowing that soon thousands of women would read her story and find in it an example of strength and resilience. Valeria's life had changed radically since the day she left Javier and Margaret's house. Although the emotional wounds still hurt, little by little she felt the weight of her past begin to ease. Every day with Teresa was a reminder that she had made the right decision, although it was not easy to rebuild herself from scratch. One morning, while Valeria was checking her social media post, she noticed that she had received hundreds of comments and messages of support. Women from all over the country were sharing similar stories, thanking her for having the courage to speak openly about her experience. She had no idea that so many women were going through the same thing. "Mom," Valeria said, showing Teresa some of the messages. "It's because no one talks about this, honey, but you did. And look how you're inspiring others." One of the messages that had the greatest impact came from a woman who had fled an abusive marriage years ago. In the message, she explained how she had started over with a small sewing business. The idea resonated with Valeria, who had always loved designing and making clothes. "What if we do the same thing, Mom?" Valeria asked excitedly. "We could start small, just the two of us." Teresa smiled. "I always knew you had a talent for that. If you want to try it, I'm with you." With the little money they had, Valeria and Teresa bought fabric, needles, and thread. The living room of their small house was soon transformed into a makeshift workshop. The first few weeks were difficult, but Valeria found new energy in creativity. As she sewed, she felt that each stitch was a way to repair not only the fabric, but also the cracks in her soul. The business started slowly, but thanks to social media and Teresa's contacts in the neighborhood, they began to receive regular orders. One of their first customers was Laura, a woman who had read Valeria's story online. "Your courage inspired me to leave a toxic relationship," Laura told her as she looked over one of the dresses Valeria had designed. "Now I want to wear something you've created as a symbol of my new life." Laura's words deeply moved Valeria. For the first time in a long time, she felt she had a purpose beyond just surviving. While Valeria and Teresa rebuilt their lives, Javier was mired in frustration. Legal measures forced him to stay away from Valeria, but that didn't stop his mother Margaret from feeding his resentment. "You can't let this defeat define you," Margaret told him constantly. "That woman humiliated us. She didn't deserve to be part of this family." Javier didn't respond. Although he hated to admit it, part of him knew that he had lost Valeria because of his own actions. However, his pride and his mother's influence prevented him from fully accepting it. Margaret, on the other hand, had no intention of sitting idly by. Through acquaintances in the neighborhood, she began to spread rumors about Valeria, accusing her of making everything up to get money and attention. "She was never a good wife," she would say to anyone willing to listen. "She just wanted our house and our money." One afternoon, while Valeria was delivering an order, she overheard some neighbors whispering near her house. "They say that everything she posted on the internet was a lie," said one. "It must be true. Javier never seemed capable of something like that," replied another. Valeria felt a pang of anger. She knew where those rumors came from, and although part of her wanted to confront Margaret directly, she understood that it wasn't worth it. Instead, she decided to focus on the positive, the women who supported her, and her new business that was beginning to thrive. That night, she shared a new post on social media, thanking those who had believed in her and supported her venture. The road to recovery is not easy, but every step is worth it. No matter what others say, the truth always finds a way to come to light. As the business grew, Valeria and Teresa began participating in local events, offering their products and connecting with other women entrepreneurs. More and more people approached Valeria, not only for her designs, but also for her story. At one of these events, a journalist became interested in her case and proposed an interview. Your story could inspire many more women, Valeria. Would you be willing to share it publicly? Valeria hesitated at first, fearing that Javier or Margaret would try to use the media attention against her. But then she remembered all the women who had supported her and decided to accept the interview. It was broadcast locally and had an immediate impact. More women began to contact Valeria, sharing their own experiences and seeking advice on how to escape similar situations. The small workshop she had started in her living room became a symbolic refuge for many, a place where they could feel understood and supported. As Valeria continued to grow personally and professionally, Javier watched from a distance as his ex-wife flourished without him. For the first time, he began to seriously question the decisions he had made. But Margaret, as always, pushed him toward resentment. You don't need her, Javier. Don't let her manipulate you with that victim facade. However, Margaret's words began to lose their power over Javier. For the first time, he seemed to be facing the possibility that he had been the problem from the beginning. Months passed, and Valeria and Teresa's workshop was no longer just a business. It had become a symbol of hope for many women in the community. Each garment they made was a story of overcoming adversity, and word of mouth led more and more people to learn about their work. However, success did not mean that the challenges disappeared completely. One afternoon, while Valeria was attending to some customers, an unknown man appeared at the door of the workshop. His face showed a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Are you Valeria?" he asked in a deep voice. "Yes, I am," she replied, feeling a pang of unease. The man held out an envelope to her. "This is from Javier." Valeria took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it immediately. It was a notification from a lawyer stating that Javier was requesting a review of the protective measures and claiming that the financial compensation agreement had been unfair. Teresa, noticing the change in Valeria's expression, quickly approached her. "What's wrong, honey?" "Javier is trying to reverse the court's ruling," she replied, feeling the fear she had tried to overcome come back to haunt her. Teresa took the document and read it carefully. "He can't do this. You already won the case. Valeria, I know Javier. He never gives up when he feels he has lost control." That night, Valeria called Manuel to inform him of the situation. The lawyer, although annoyed by Javier's strategy, reassured her. "This is more of an attempt to intimidate you than something with legal grounds. Don't worry, we'll face it as we did before." However, the stress affected Valeria deeply. Her nights were once again restless, filled with nightmares in which she relived the darkest moments of her relationship with Javier. During the day, she tried to hide her anxiety while working in the workshop, but Teresa noticed her tension. "You can't let this stop you, daughter. You got out of his control once, and you can do it again." "What if I can't, Mom? He always knows how to break me." Teresa took Valeria's hands firmly. "No, not this time. You're not alone." The day of the review hearing arrived quickly. Valeria appeared in court with Manuel and Teresa by her side, while Javier and Margaret arrived together as a united front. Margaret, as always, maintained her haughty expression, looking at Valeria with contempt. Javier's lawyer argued that the protective measures were excessive and that Javier only wanted to regain his right to interact with Valeria. He also claimed that the financial compensation had been disproportionate and based on insufficient evidence. When Manuel took the floor, he dismantled each argument with precision, reminding the court of the evidence presented in the previous trial, the threatening messages, the medical reports, and the testimonies confirming the abuse. "This attempt at review is nothing more than a tactic to harass and intimidate my client," Manuel stated firmly. "Valeria has the right to live in peace and continue with her life without the burden of her ex-husband's actions." Javier, visibly irritated, tried to interrupt several times, but the judge finally stopped him. Valeria stood up to give her statement. "What they are seeking is not justice, but to punish me for having had the courage to leave a relationship that was destroying me. I don't want revenge. I just want to be able to live without fear." The judge listened in silence, taking occasional notes. After several hours of deliberation, the moment of the verdict arrived. This court finds insufficient grounds to modify the previously established measures. The protections will remain in effect, and the compensation awarded to Ms. Valeria will remain as ruled. Valeria felt a weight lift off her shoulders as Margaret and Javier left the courtroom with expressions of defeat. Teresa took Valeria in an embrace. "You did it again, daughter. You faced him, and you won." Back at home, Valeria decided it was time to take another step. She wanted to create a space where they could share their experiences and find mutual support. The event was a success. More than 20 women gathered, some with tears in their eyes as they told their own stories of abuse and overcoming adversity. Valeria realized that she was not only rebuilding her life, but also helping others find the strength to rebuild theirs. Meanwhile, Javier, in his isolation, began to face an uncomfortable truth. Margaret, in an attempt to maintain her control over him, continued to feed his resentment. But something in Javier had changed. For the first time, he began to question not only Valeria's actions, but his own. "Maybe it was my fault that it all ended this way," he said one night, leaving Margaret speechless. "Your fault?" she replied with a mixture of fury and surprise. "You destroyed this family, Javier." "Maybe there was no family to destroy, Mom," he replied bitterly, before leaving the room. For the first time, Javier seemed to be facing up to his own responsibility. With each passing day, he felt his life taking a new direction. The workshop that had started as a small project had now become a solid business, but more than financial success, what really filled her with pride was the support network she had created around it. Women who once felt as trapped as she did were now coming together to share stories, resources, and hope. One afternoon, while Valeria was working on a dress for a special client, Teresa walked in with a beaming smile and a letter in her hand. "This is for you, dear," she said, handing her the envelope. Valeria opened it with curiosity. It was an invitation to speak at a local forum on domestic violence. They had read her story and wanted her to share her experience with other women who were seeking the courage to free themselves. "What do you say?" Teresa asked. Although her face all ready, Valeria smiled, but there was a glimmer of nervousness in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. If anyone is ready, it's you, Valeria. You've already proven that you have the strength to inspire others." The day of the forum arrived faster than Valeria had expected. The room was full of women of all ages, some accompanied by their children. Valeria stood up in front of the microphone, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. "A year ago, I never would have imagined being here talking to you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "For a long time, I thought my life had no way out. I believed that pain and humiliation were all I deserved, but I was wrong." As she spoke, tears began to roll down her cheeks, but she did not try to hide them. Her vulnerability made the audience connect deeply with her. "Today, I am here because someone believed in me when I couldn't do it. My mother Teresa gave me the strength to move forward, but I also learned to believe in myself, and that is something none of us should forget. We are stronger than we think." When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Several women approached her to thank her, some sharing how her story had inspired them to take steps toward their own freedom. While Valeria thrived, Javier continued to struggle with his new reality. Although he was still under Margaret's influence, something inside of him had changed. One night, while looking at a photo of his wedding with Valeria, he remembered how it had all begun, with love and promises. "When did I ruin everything?" he murmured, leaving the photo on the table. Margaret, hearing his voice, entered the room with an irritated expression. "Stop torturing yourself, Javier. That woman was never right for you." "No, Mom, I was never right for her," he replied, surprising Margaret with his honesty. Javier began to distance himself from his mother, spending more time alone, reflecting on his mistakes. Although he had never been good at expressing his feelings, he knew he had lost Valeria because of his own inability to be the man she deserved. One afternoon, as Valeria was closing the workshop, an unexpected customer appeared at the door. It was Javier. "What are you doing here?" Valeria asked. Her body tensed immediately. Javier raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I didn't come to cause you trouble. I just want to talk." Valeria hesitated, but finally let him in, standing near the door. I want to apologize, Javier said. Valeria looked into his eyes, which showed a sincerity she had never seen before. I know that nothing I say can erase what I did to you. I was a coward, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret it. Valeria looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and caution. And what do you expect me to do with your apology, Javier? Nothing. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that I recognize my mistakes. The silence between them was heavy, full of painful memories. Finally, Valeria spoke. Thank you for saying that, but this apology doesn't change anything. What I need from you is for you to move on with your life and let me live in peace. Javier nodded slowly. I will. I promise. When he left, Valeria closed the door and remained silent for a few moments, processing what had happened. Although Javier's words did not erase the damage, she felt that it was a necessary closure for that chapter of her life. That night, Valeria sat down with Teresa at the kitchen table. Are you okay, honey? Teresa asked. Yes, Mom. I think I finally am. They both smiled, knowing that although the road had been difficult, they had reached a place where peace and hope were possible. The days following the unexpected encounter with Javier marked a turning point for Valeria. Although the emotional scars were still present, the fact that Javier had accepted his mistakes allowed her to close a chapter that had long felt like an open wound. Now, she could focus completely on her new life. The workshop had become a place of inspiration, not only for her and Teresa, but also for the women who had found refuge there. Every design, every garment that came out of there, carried with it a story of resilience and hope. One morning, Valeria received a call that left her speechless. It was from an international organization that had heard about her case and the impact that her workshop was having on the community. They wanted to invite her to participate in a conference in New York City, where she would share her experience with activist leaders and the media. I'll be speaking in front of so many people, Valeria asked, feeling anxiety begin to form in her chest. Of course you will, my daughter, Teresa said with a warm smile. You've come further than you ever imagined, and this is only the beginning. The day of the conference arrived, and Valeria, dressed in one of her own designs, took the stage in front of a crowd that watched her intently. Although she was nervous, she took a deep breath and began to speak with the same sincerity she had shown in her initial post a year ago. She was a woman who had overcome adversity and was now sharing her story with the world. Her own design took the stage in front of a crowd that watched her intently. Although she was nervous, she took a deep breath and began to speak with the same sincerity she had shown in her initial post a year ago. I was a broken woman, trapped in a cycle of abuse that I thought I would never be able to escape. Today, I am here not because I am stronger than other women, but because I decided I deserved better. Valeria recounted her story from the dark days in Javier's house to the moment she decided to flee, find help, and rebuild her life. But she didn't stop there. She spoke about the importance of support networks, Teresa's unconditional love, and how her workshop had become a symbol of transformation for her and many others. It's not easy to overcome the fear, shame, and guilt that abuse leaves in us, but I can tell you that it is possible. More importantly, you don't have to do it alone. When the talk ended, the applause was deafening. Women of all ages approached her to thank her, some with tears in their eyes, as they told her how her story had inspired them to seek help or make decisions they had postponed out of fear. Meanwhile, Margaret was alone in her house. Javier had decided to move away, to start over, leaving behind his mother's toxic influence. For the first time, Margaret was facing the consequences of her own actions. Although she would never admit it, the emptiness she now felt was a constant reminder of how her decisions had alienated everyone who had once been by her side. Valeria and Teresa's workshop continued to grow, and over time, they began to work with other women who abusive men often act in a calculated way to emotionally manipulate their partners, making them dependent and vulnerable. They begin by creating a false sense of security, promising eternal love, and showing attentiveness at the beginning of the relationship. However, little by little, they begin to undermine the woman's self-esteem with subtle criticisms that become more frequent and cruel. These abusers use control as their main weapon, They control the woman's clothes, friendships, money, and even her thoughts, making her believe that she is not capable of making decisions for herself. They often make comments such as, "You are lucky to have me. No one else would love you like this." These words are a strategy to isolate her and break her confidence until she feels she has no choice but to stay in the relationship. The violence can be verbal, emotional, physical, or a combination of all of these. But it always follows the same pattern. The abuser blames the woman for the problems, minimizes her pain, and makes her feel guilty for wanting something better for herself. This manipulation is so subtle that victims often take a long time to realize that they are trapped in a cycle of abuse. But it is important to remember that it is not the victim's fault. No woman deserves to be disrespected, minimized, or mistreated. All women deserve love, respect, and happiness. If you are in such a situation, remember that it is possible to get out, that there are people and organizations ready to help you. You are stronger than you think, and you deserve a life full of peace and love. Getting out of an abusive relationship is difficult, but it is the first step to regain your freedom and rebuild your self-esteem. You are not alone. Seek support, trust in your strength, and remember that a better life awaits you, a life where you will be loved and valued for who you are. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to explore more content on our channel. We have many more exciting and thought-provoking stories like this one that seek to inspire you and show you that there is always hope. Click on the following video and join us for another narration that will surely captivate you from the very beginning. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your comment, and share this video with those you think need it. Thank you for being part of this community.